There are a few skills in snooker that are simply overpowered, and just being able to do them well can dramatically improve your game. So here's the most vital ways to take advantage of long potting and safety that most players simply don't know about or don't want to tell you. This is Break From Life. Welcome back, and if it's your first time watching one of our videos, then it's fantastic to have you here. If you want to get a chance in a game of snooker, then at some stage you will have to outplay your opponent from distance. The simplest thing you can do to prevent your opponent from potting the ball is to get the cue ball as far away from the object ball as possible. As all the reds start up the black end of the table, this usually means returning the cue ball to the opposite end. But to make this even harder for your opponent, you're going to need to get the cue ball close to the bulk cushion or snooker them behind one of the bulk colours. And there's something here that if you can get right will increase your chances of winning a game. And we'll have a look at that after we give a quick mention to Demixior in Gdansk, Poland. This is preventing your opponent from having a ball to pot, but it's not that simple, you see.
When you're forced to play safe, you have two major objectives.
This is preventing your opponent from potting a ball on the next visit and preventing them from having a straightforward shot.
So if I want to make it as difficult as possible, I've got to get the cue ball down here.
So I could have played this shot better and got the cue ball closer to the bulk cushion, but the problem is I'd still be leaving a potable shot on. So even if it's very difficult, it's still potable.
So what happens if I make sure I don't leave my opponent a pot on?
So this time my opponent has no chance of potting a ball, but I haven't prevented them from playing a straightforward shot, and that means my next shot will be very difficult, and I'm likely to leave them a chance next time. So before we can get any of these things right, we have to get the right mindset.
You have to play the game in a way that every single time you leave your opponent a chance, they might win the frame from it.
Obviously this in itself won't help you, because it's a bit like saying play better. And obviously you can't rely on your opponent making basic errors to get chances in the game. So if you want to gain from this, you have to find a way to apply it practically. And this is something people talk about doing a lot, but they never really talk about how to do this. And this is either because they don't know, or quite often they don't really want to give it away.
What does that mean? Well, every time you play safe, you have to do everything possible to prevent leaving a possible shot on,
as well as making that shot as difficult for your opponent as possible.
But can you always do that?
Well, no, because on a shot like this, even if I catch the reds really thin, eventually I'll start pushing them towards the pocket, and it's far harder to keep large quantities of balls safe than it is just one or two. Whatever you do, eventually you'll be leaving potable reds on for your opponent, unless you're able to get the cue ball into some very strategically safe locations. But where are they?
You can use these, the 9 safest places on the bulk cushion. Now if you're in or around where these reds are, you're going to simply be in a lot safer position than if you were in a gap, for example, and that's just because of how strategically they are placed. If you get in position A, for example, it blocks off the middle of the table and can force your opponent into a mistake. Position B is brilliant, a really defensive shot because it blocks off both corner pockets with the brown and the outside colour. Position C is great if you're trying again to force your opponent into a mistake because it blocks the outside of the pack. Position D blocks the opposite corner pocket with the outside colour, and this can really help on shots where you're trying to cover a red near a pocket. And position E does the same thing with the blue. And the further you come over to the outside of the table, the harder it is to play safe from the pack.
Now it's not necessarily easy to get the cue ball in these locations, but it does give you somewhere to aim. Like here, for example, I'm opening the reds everywhere, so I'm trying to get in position B to block both corner pockets. With this shot I'm using left hand side to spin the cue ball round the yellow and get the white into position C. With this shot I'm trying to cover the red over the pocket by getting the cue ball into position D. And here I'm trying to force my opponent into playing a very difficult long pot by getting the cue ball behind the green in position C, blocking the easy safety shot.
Now there are 4 different shots you can use to get back to bulk.
thin off the pack or ball in the middle of the table. With this shot you're usually trying to get the cue ball to strike the side cushion just before the middle pocket. This next shot is sometimes known as a figure of 8 safety, where you're using side spin to get the cue ball to go beneath the blue in the same way you would on a break-off shot. This can give you a massive advantage if balls are going towards pockets because it allows you to play the shot slightly harder. This is probably the hardest shot to return to bulk, a ball close to or tight to the top cushion. That's why at the end of the video we have a look at how to practice this shot. And finally, playing thin off a red on a side cushion. As long as you can avoid the double kiss, this is usually a lot more straightforward shot than it actually looks. But of course you don't necessarily have to return the cue ball to bulk. You can play what is sometimes referred to as a dump shot, leaving the cue ball on the top cushion. This and rolling the cue ball into the reds does hand the advantage over to your opponent a bit, and you do have to be very careful that you're not going to be leaving a straightforward pot on. But we are leaving a pin on the board for Aaron in Lorth in the Republic of Ireland. This is how you can very simply increase the odds of you winning a game, you see.
In most sports you're often rewarded for doing two things at once, and snooker is no exception.
A shot to nothing is very simply attempting a pot at the same time as playing safe. This means if you miss the pot, then you're still getting the cue ball back in a safe location. The more of these shots you can pick out, the better you'll do in a frame of snooker, because there's less chance you'll leave your opponent on. The two most common ways a shot to nothing is played is to stun the cue ball round the angles with side spin to get the cue ball back to a safer position, or just to play a regular thin safety shot in the middle of the table where there's a good chance that you could pot the ball. As the name suggests here, there's a chance nothing may come of it, but
being able to pick out and play these shots well will at the very least give you a huge tactical advantage in the frame.
often if you're playing a shot that's far from guaranteed, there's somewhere you can leave the cue ball where you're less likely to leave a pot on. A lot of the time it won't be completely safe, but at least you're making it harder for your opponent. And sometimes if you're very lucky you'll be able to play pot position and have zero consequences for missing it.
In fact, anytime you're playing a tough shot, there'll often be a way to minimise the risk of leaving your opponent a straightforward chance.
What you do have to remember is, although this is a very good idea on a missable pot, you will never get it completely safe, and when you do get a good opportunity in the balls, playing a shot to nothing is often the worst thing you can do, because you need to be focused on break building and winning the game. But right now we're focusing on the all-seeing master from Rochester in New York State. But you'll really struggle to win the game by just playing safe.
If you've played the game long enough, you may have noticed when you're playing the best players in the game and you really put them in trouble, well then sometimes
they're able to just pull out a long pot and win the game from it. And this is all to do with straight cueing.
Being able to do that is absolutely game changing, because it means you're able to steal the chance that otherwise your opponent would have had. But unfortunately, there's no simple trick to straight cueing.
You need to be able to line up the shots accurately, find the centre of the cue ball, and have a very strong technique. But the good thing is, there's one thing we don't have to worry about. If you play a shot slowly with side spin, then the spin will grip the cloth, and here the right hand side is pulling the cue ball to the right. However, on all the shots where we're going to be playing this, we're going to be striking the cue ball hard enough that this doesn't actually have a chance to take effect. Unfortunately though, what we will have to allow for is how the cue ball deflects off the tip. This is where we need to get the cue ball, and if we strike the cue ball slightly to the left, it's more likely to go to the right side, missing the red then to the left. And of course right hand side will give us exactly the opposite problem. This is why I said to be able to play these shots well, you have to line them up accurately, find the centre of the cue ball, and be able to deliver your cue straight through the centre. You will still be able to pot these shots with side spin, but you'll just be far more inconsistent. However, just by practicing the right things can seriously help with your straight cueing and the safety shots we were talking about earlier. With this routine you place all 21 balls in line with the middle pockets, line them up as straight as you can and see how many you can pot. If you can get anywhere near to half of these, you're doing excellently, and it can really help with your confidence. As I said earlier, these are really difficult safety shots to get right, and if you can play them well, then you can probably play almost any safety shot. Just have around 10 goes at them and see how many you can get back to bulk, and to make it slightly harder, try playing them from tight on the cushion. This third routine is a great way to practice general safety. Start with the cue ball and the D and the black on its spot. The idea is to get the cue ball and the black on opposite sides of the bulk line every time you play a shot. This either means getting the cue ball or the black in bulk, but not both. It's a great way of practicing controlling both balls. And if you pot the black, just respot it on the black spot. This doesn't necessarily make straight cueing any easier though, because there's a lot to technically get right. So if you want to find out more about that, try the video in the card right now. And as I was explaining earlier, it's not as simple as having a good technique. You also have to be able to line the shot up well and find the centre of the cue ball. And if you want to find out more about lining shots up in snooker, then try our video, Snooker How to Aim Basic. And if you want to find out more about overpowered snooker shots, then try our video on break building skills. And remember, don't just watch, play, and make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.